Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Jadey Rindak, and I am a recruiter and a coach and work with professionals at very interesting inflection points in their careers. And I'm joined today by Elissa Hobfoll. She's an employment lawyer whose ethos I really admire. One of the topics that's come up for me, and I know for her as well, is around the concept of non-competes. I've had questions from candidates, I've had questions from coaching clients and even from hiring managers. And so I thought, hey, why don't we ask Elissa to come and join the conversation and just help empower all of us on the topic. So Elissa was actually referred to me. I worked with her personally to navigate a non-compete, and she's been my go-to employment lawyer since then. So I was in a role and it was eliminated during a company complete restructure. And they tried to have me sign a non-compete, a new non-compete, and all kinds of other legal language before getting a severance. There were lots of thoughts I had, lots of emotions I had, and the thing was, as soon as I spoke to Elissa, she just helped me just get clarity instantly. She helped me center really on what was important for me, and then gave me some language that I added to a few emails. I was able to really do it with strength. I kept the relationship cordial. I got to not sign that thing. And I even got to keep my computer, which I loved. And I even received a little additional severance as well. I'm a fan and I refer her all the time. Elissa, I wanted to just throw it to you to really unpack that emotional side a bit more. Do you see that quite often as you're working with your clients?
Yeah, I would say it falls into two major camps. The Certainly with the individuals, with the businesses at the front end when they're drafting them, when they're putting them into contracts, I find that they don't think too much about them. So there's not a whole lot of emotion there. At the end where they want either affirmation of them or where they think they want to try and enforce them, there's oftentimes a lot of anger there that employers feel and businesses feel very possessive of the business interests that they believe that they're trying to protect. When it comes to individuals, then there's two real camps that I see the most. And the first is at the beginning, people are so excited about a new job. That's typically where we see a lot of non-competes come into play. They don't want to make waves, they don't want to make changes, or they have just so much energy about the positive future opportunity about them. Then on the flip side, when people are leaving or when the employer is trying to enforce a non-compete against an individual, there's often a lot of fear. And I find that there's a lot of fear based around lack of information, lack of knowledge, fear about a lawsuit, fear about their reputation in their industry. And there's also a lot of fear about wanting to be able to continue to work in the industry, especially if they've been doing actively working in a field for a
Right.
really long period of time. So you see a lot of elation or no knowledge at all or
Yeah.
some real fear.
Yeah. Yeah, and I absolutely sympathize with that. All of those, right? I'm dealing with candidates all the time who are excited about offers. And it's also at that point when, they are going to sign a new non-compete while they're still concerned about the old non-compete and not really taking care of any of that business, like really getting clear about either one of those. And before we get too far afield here, let's just break it down. So, what are non-competes? What are they used for? What are they good for?
It's pretty right there in the title, right? It's an agreement by the individual. It's not always an employee, but in this context, most commonly, but oftentimes business partners have them too. Commercial contracts can have them too. But it's an agreement usually during the time of the relationship. So while you're employed and for a period of time thereafter, that the individual agrees not to engage in any activity that would put the business at risk. So the business at risk. So oftentimes that's not working for a direct competitor, not working in a certain industry, not engaging with certain former coworkers, not engaging with certain former clients or customers, all can fall into the non-compete category. What I think is really important to remember about these is they're contracts. They're written, they're a bargain for exchange. The individual is to get something of value in exchange for a promise not to do something. That's what they are at the fundamental core. And because they are contracts, I'm sure many people in our audience today are business people, executives, business owners, they know contracts are negotiable. Oftentimes, you get presented with something either for a sale or for employment or from a vendor, and you have to negotiate the terms. And non-competes are no different than that. The thing about non-competes that's a little bit different in most states, and we have to remember that it's a very state-specific inquiry, so different states have different limitations. So, for example, California has no restrictions. You cannot have a non-compete in California, whereas a place like Illinois, you can have them, but there are legal mandates about how they are supposed to operate and what is permitted and what is not permitted. So we have to look at all of those elements when it's coming to that understanding, but essentially, you are going to be coming at it with some information and with some knowledge to know
Mhm.
what, from the business standpoint, what you can ask for from your employees and what they can promise, and from the
Mhm.
individual, what the employer can ask of you and what they need to be providing to you in exchange to make that promise valid.
Got it. And first of all, I want to just note that we have put together an FAQ document and also a state by state kind of cheat sheet for folks. Feel free to download that so that you can get granular for your particular state. I'll also say, I want to make sure we're not giving legal advice here per se. So definitely talk to your lawyer when with your specific situation. But as a just an understanding, a general concept understanding, hopefully this gives you some good fodder to educate yourself. And so I want to turn it now to understanding that life cycle of the non-compete. You had brought up something which I think is really interesting. It's like you really see it from both perspectives, right? The employer perspective of what it is that they're trying to protect all the way through the candidate life cycle and the employee life cycle. You had mentioned that oftentimes they put the non-competes together, not really thinking about it. So can you just take us through the full life cycle?
Yes. I actually have my perspective on this has grown over time. I represent a number of individuals when they like you when they are
Mhm.
trying when they're being presented with them or when they are trying to negotiate them. But I also represent a number of businesses when they are drafting them and when they are putting them in their agreements. And then another part of my practice, I'm an arbitrator and a mediator. So when I serve as an arbitrator, I am oftentimes deciding whether or not legally, whether or not those are enforceable as a binding decision between an employer and employee. And then as a mediator, I'm often in the seat after there's been a conflict and there's a dispute and the parties want to work together to resolve the dispute. I work to help facilitate the negotiation in real time of those non-competes. And through those different areas of my practices, I've really seen quite quite the wide life cycle of the non-compete. In the first phase, so you see them in the drafting as one phase, the signing as another phase, and then the separation of an employee and the enforcement of them is the sort of final phase. The drafting of them is really more about the employer, right? And I think a lot of employers just think that they need to put them in there, that it's just that's what you do. You have to have them in there. But what employers really need to think about, as opposed to just saying, either talking to AI or to looking up something online, or even just going to their attorney and saying, I need a restrictive covenant in here, I need a non compete agreement, is to really think about what are your legitimate protectable business interests? What are you actually trying to protect that you have a right to protect? and to try and be as thoughtful about that as possible and to narrowly tailor the terms so that they are truly enforceable. I've seen some terms that just on their face would not be enforceable in states where you can have that fight, where there are states that you have to evaluate the reasonability of the enforceability of the terms. So, for example, I've seen businesses try to put in terms that say things like the employee cannot work for a competitor, but don't define the word competitor. So you might be in a working for a company that does a lot of different things, and you may have only worked in some small department of that employer. Any business competing with you without a definition may render that unenforceable. So an employer has to be very thoughtful about what's going into the drafting of these because their intent is well founded. Businesses invest a lot of time and money and energy into developing their workforce and into developing their customer base and developing their goods and their services, creating their confidential and proprietary information. And they have oftentimes employers have a valid need to protect those interests. So drafting it is really important. When you next part the life cycle is bringing it to the employee to sign, oftentimes you're going to see that in a new employment agreement, an offer
Mhm.
letter, an employment contract, but also sometimes after there's been an acquisition, sometimes new leadership comes in and midstream in the life cycle of your employment, your employer might come to you and have you review one and ask you to sign one. And that's an important time too, because that's, I think, the best opportunity to come at it with in good faith to try and revise and negotiate the terms so that they are reasonable in that they protect the businesses, but also don't become an undue burden or impose some undue restrictions on employees. And that's also the time where people are in this positive spirit, right? The employers want the employees and the employees want the jobs. So everybody wants to work together to make it work.
And
The
what I
next
find too with coaching, both candidates as well as just coaching clients, is there's that concern of not rocking the boat at that
Oh,
point.
yeah.
And, what I've really especially for senior level professionals, it gives them an opportunity to really showcase their leadership. They need to understand their value, and organizations want people to who do understand their value. Also, it showcases how they may be negotiating on behalf of the business. So you don't have to necessarily go for the jugular, but this is absolutely a time to get clarity and to show your leadership.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think even building on with that is to demonstrate that you're a detail oriented person, that you're reading things that you're signing, that you're asking the right questions, that you are engaging with curiosity. You don't have to go into the process of trying to negotiate a non compete with guns blazing. You can really come into it from a point of curiosity to say to your employer, okay, I noticed that there's a non compete in here. Talk to me about what your real interests are. What have you invested in? What are we trying to protect? I have an interest and you have an interest in making sure that this is enforceable. So let's make sure it's written in a way that will make that as likely as possible to make sure that we all understand the terms. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had clients go to their employers to try to negotiate, and the employers just were not even really aware of what was in
Yeah.
there or how broad it was or how restrictive it was. And we're really happy to
Mhm.
negotiate it to make sure that it covered what they really needed it to cover. So I think it can, when done the right way, make the individual employee going to their employer really look like a thoughtful, considerate, knowledgeable business person. And to your point, really demonstrate the way that they're going to be able to advocate on behalf of the company as well, especially when it's something that's not exactly in their wheelhouse. If you're a creative or if you're
Mhm.
in sales or if that's your background, I think that really shows employers that they've picked the right person who is paying attention and wants to make it the best scenario for all the parties involved.
Absolutely. And so then the end of the life cycle, obviously departure.
That's the hardest one, right?
Yeah.
So that's where you see the most emotions. And that's where employers get very scared that employees are taking things that they shouldn't or going to do things that are going to threaten the operations of their business. And it's where individuals are really scared that they're not going to be able to work in their chosen fields anymore. They're also scared sometimes if the separation is acrimonious that an employer will come down very hard on them. And then there are all these people who think that they're just not enforceable. And I think because there are states like California where
Yeah.
they are not enforceable, but really it comes down to the details of them, their enforceability. But I think I see it as a way to bring closure to the relationship that makes it better, right? Because again, it's that opportunity to engage with curiosity and to talk about the process. I think it's an opportunity for an employer to take another generous overture to an employee to help. Oftentimes, what the employer wants in conjunction with signing a non compete at the end, if they haven't signed it already at the beginning, right? If it's on a
Right.
separation document, is they want a release from the employee. They want to also a
Mhm.
promise from the employee not to ever sue the company, or they want a promise from the employee to maintain confidentiality as to certain subject matters. So they want things from the employee too. And then the employee wants to have a good reference or a neutral reference at the very least.
Mhm.
So I think it's another opportunity to close the relationship or that chapter with some maturity and leave a very potentially negative experience with a positive note that we've worked together at the end of something to come to a mutual decision about how something is going to resolve. And those tend to end much better too. And I think makes both the employer and the employee feel much better about the end of the relationship because everybody feels like they had a say in the process.
Absolutely. And what I find too is the people who find that really are able to orchestrate that kind of closure, and whether or not the separation was something that they desired or it was a surprise to them, either one, that they have some power in this process, are able to move more quickly through and interview better and have a clearer point of view about the kinds of opportunities that they want to go after, and can do it with a bit more velocity and confidence. So I completely concur. Like, getting clarity on that is so important. One thing I also hear is some people are concerned, right? Like, they think, especially if they're in sales or in some kind of role where they think that they're bringing, their client list, right? Or that there's an opportunity to bring a book of business. Um, what I find is that hiring managers, they really want to hire people's talent and skills. Yes, it'd be great if you could bring your direct, list of, but generally I think companies are more savvy than that. And so I think that there's a little bit too much fear around whether or not you can directly go after or bring with you that. Like, if you don't bring that, you don't bring value. That's not true. It's your skills, your ability, your insights, the information that you've gleaned throughout your career that hiring managers are trying to hire.
I
Um,
agree with that completely. And I mean, listen, these agreements have to be reasonable in temporal scope as well. So depending where you are, that can be different lengths of time. So the idea, hopefully, is you move on to a new employer for to work there for a long period of time.
mhm,
Eventually, you'll be able to go after I mean, we're talking now a little bit more about a non-solicitation to not
mhm,
solicit former customers or clients. But if you have longevity at an employer, that time will come again. And I think employers know that you have to have certain abilities and talents in order to have attracted that customer base to begin with. You'll be able to shine that skill set on
yeah,
at the new employer and bring in new customers. Um, and not to get too deep into the weeds I know we're here to talk about non-competes as opposed to
Mhm.
non-solicits, but not with the non-solicitation, those are very, very hard to prove a breach of. And as long as you, as the individual, are not going to the customer and saying, "Hey, I'm leaving company A and going to company B. Come with me." It's very hard to prove it. So if a customer or a client hears that you've left company A to go to company B and want to follow you there, um, your former employer cannot stop a business or an individual from acting with their own autonomy to get the goods and services that they want. So it's not necessarily as limiting in that particular capacity
Mhm.
as some people think. But getting back to the negotiation element of it a little bit, that is one thing that I think that people can have a lot of success in negotiating is what are the customers that you are like, I'm going to continue to work in this sales role to go with the example you posited. Um, and to go to your employer and say, who are the customers that you are most concerned about? Because, for example, in Illinois, the law says you have to have essentially a near permanent relationship with those customers in order to protect that relationship. Do they have a contract? Is that contract for a long time? Are these the kind of customers that bid out this work all the time? Or are they the kind that stay with the same vendor or server or provider for a long period of time? Those are more protectable. So you can go, when you have that knowledge, you can go to your employer and say, who are we really trying to and then let's come up with a list.
Mhm.
I agree, business A, you've spent 20 years or 5 years developing this relationship with this customer. You have a protectable interest there. But maybe there's somebody that we bid out for work 2 years ago who was a potential customer, and that is not going to fall into it. So I think figuring out who the employer is the most interested in protecting their relationships with is a good act of generosity or can be perceived as an act of generosity on the part of the individual, and a great negotiating starting point to say, like, hey, I want to give you what you need. Let's talk about how we can get there and put this in terms that everybody agrees to and understands.
Well, my goodness, I just feel like we're scratching the surface. I think you've given, really great insights, but as we're coming down to the close here, you know, I'd love to just get a sense, like a quick rundown of, if you can, of what generally is enforceable and what is generally not enforceable.
I mean, I think you have to think about it as a funnel. So the broader the contract is written, if it's covering the sun and the moon and the stars, that's way less likely to be enforceable. Most courts will only enforce non-competes that are quote unquote reasonable in the eyes of the court. So they have to be narrowly tailored to, again, protect the employer's legitimate business interests. So sometimes that can be their workforce, the stability of their workforce, their confidential information, sometimes their customer relationships. They
Yeah.
also need to be given, employee needs to be given something of value in exchange for the promise. For example, in Illinois, if the only thing of value you were given is your continued employment somewhere, if you sign the agreement at the beginning of your employment relationship, you have to work there for at least 2 years in order for employment to be something to consider to be of enough value that the employer receives in exchange for the promise not to compete. So you're always looking for, was there consideration and are they reasonable? And the more narrow they are, the more narrowly tailored and specifically drafted to the employee's position and the employer's business and what they actually do, the more likely they are to be enforced.
Beautiful. And last thought that we want to leave the folks with.
My last thought is really what we were talking about before is the best piece of advice, how you opened it. And I get Get knowledge up front. Talk to somebody with knowledge, me, another attorney, an HR generalist, somebody who does this stuff all the time so that you can arm yourself with the information to know what's enforceable, what you can negotiate, what you can do as an employer, and what you can ask of your employees, because information is going to help you through every element of this process.
Beautiful. I thank everybody for joining. Please send comments. Please reach out if you would like to contact me or Alyssa to continue the conversation. And just remember, right, like you're out there designing and driving your own career. Please continue to negotiate and keep on thriving. Until next time, be well, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Jadey. This was fun.
Absolutely. Thank you.